Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are connecting from. To our esteemed panel of speakers, members of the public, Expenditure and Financial Accountability PEFA Steering Committee, and public financial management practitioners who are connected, welcome to today's event on public financial management in the 21st century. Harnessing data for better policymaking. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ed Olowokere, the Global Director for Governance at the World Bank, and it is my privilege and pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the PEFA Secretariat and the PEFA Initiative Partners. We are delighted to have you with us today as we launch first global report on public financial management that was prepared by the PEFA Secretariat. That so many of you are connected at this session serves as a reminder to us all just how important our work on public financial management is. Many of you will be familiar with the Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability known as PEFA Initiative, or maybe specifically with the PEFA Performance Measurement Framework, known as PEFA. Some of you may know this very well or only to a limited extent. So let me provide some background information on PEFA. The PEFA program was initiated in 2001. So it has just turned 20 years old. It should therefore not be surprising to anyone connected today that we will be celebrating 2 decades of public financial management through the PEFA lens with major events all through this year, 2021. This event today is the first one to kick off the 20th anniversary of PEFA. Since its introduction, the PEFA program's performance measurement framework has been adopted by a wide range of countries, as well as international development agencies. And it has grown from a PFM diagnostic tool used by a limited group of donors into a gold standard PFM tool that country authorities use to monitor PFM performance and draw on to formulate PFM reform programs, often with support from international development partners. Over the past 2 decades, PEFA moved from strength to strength. Let me highlight 3 key areas that I'm particularly proud of. First, the country ownership of PEFA assessments significantly enhanced, with PEFA getting mainstreamed as the primary analytical underpinning for government's public financial management reform strategies. Second, the quality of PEFA reports significantly improved with the PEFA check credentials. And third, PEFA assessments triggered thinking into emerging issues in public financial management. The PFM issues emerging during the pandemic makes PEFA even more important as countries battle the health, social, and economic fallouts from the COVID-19 crisis. We have seen firsthand how countries with stronger and modern PFM systems were able to respond with ease when the pandemic broke out, while some other countries struggled. The Global Report on Public Financial Management presents the most comprehensive periodic examination of the state of PFM worldwide. Uniquely, it uses PEFA data to offer insights into PFM performance trends at the global, regional, and country level, as well as across key areas of the budget cycle. You will see in today's presentation that the report, which is only available online, contains a wide range of interactive data visualization, short analysis, and country examples that can be a resource for practitioners, policymakers, researchers, and other stakeholders. Now, let me take you through how we have organized today's session. We have Oscar and Richard and Tia from the PEFA Secretariat who will present the global report and give a synopsis of its key features. After the report is presented, we will convene a panel discussion with global PFM experts to talk about current and emerging PFM challenges and how we could better harness data to address some of these issues. The discussions will be moderated by Adenike Oyeyola, Practice Manager in the Governance Global Practice. We are honored today to have Mr. Franson Yamba, Secretary to the Treasury, Zambia. We also have Selandra Patanayak from IMF and Joachim Wiener from London School of Economics and Political Science with us as guest speakers. All three of them are esteemed specialists in public financial management. I now invite the team from the PEFA Secretariat to present the highlights of the report. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ed. And thank you to everyone for joining us to launch this very important initiative. Now, let me just share my screen. So thank you again, everyone, for your attention. Now, as Ed mentioned, it is widely accepted that well-developed PFM systems are necessary for the proper implementation of fiscal policy measures, as we can see in the current environment that we're currently facing. Consequently, many countries across the world have invested in a lot of resources in building strong PFM systems. But despite the heightened focus on PFM over these last 2 decades, there's still very little literature on the aggregate performance of PFM. In general, practitioners seem to be more or less very familiar with PFM performance on a country-by-country basis. Also, there seems to be many one-off publications that have commented on specific PFM topics or may have captured PFM at particular points in time. But up until now, there has been no information source that gives a comprehensive, periodic, global view of PFM trends and performance. At the same time, the Secretariat, the PEFA Secretariat, has cultivated a unique, rich database on PFM. And this database has largely been underutilized. Since its introduction, the framework has been used in over 675 countries to assess PFM systems worldwide. And as illustrated on this chart, you can see that the data is available by several different categorizations. So the question that we had at the time of inception was this: what can we do with this abundant data on PFM performance? And more importantly, how can we as a Secretariat facilitate learning in this regard? Well, for the very first time, we're happy to announce that we have analyzed all the publicly available data of PEFA data in the very first global report on public financial management. And as Ed mentioned, it is an online report that will enable readers to browse through performance trends across regions, across time periods, and across various functional aspects of PFM. The report has 6 main chapters, as is being displayed here on your screen. But for the purposes of today's launch, I will focus mostly on chapter 3. And this chapter is where we present our analysis of PFM trends. So let's have a look at a few of the global trends in the report. Now, here, first of all, looking at regional statistics, it seems that countries in the East and Central Asia region are, on average, performing relatively better than others. A closer look at the data basically reveals that this is the case for all aspects of PFM. If you look at the bottom left of your screen, we're displaying information about budget preparation. It's the same case for budget execution, accounting and reporting. They're all the same, they're all showing the same tendencies. On the other hand, there appears to be a lot of opportunities to strengthen PFM systems in the sub-Saharan African region, and also in the South Asia region. It also appears that national governments typically outperform subnational governments when it comes to PFM. The second thing I would like to highlight is that the report highlights that countries are performing on some aspects of PFM better than others. And in this graph is showing that key areas where there is a tendency for countries to outperform on PFM include the budget preparation process. And this also includes in-year resource allocations, internal controls on non-salary expenditures, and debt management. Going even further, this slide basically indicates that countries are relatively strong at preparing multi-annual budgets. It also seems that budget documents are typically quite comprehensive, and that countries generally handle important treasury functions well. For example, the recording and management of cash balances, debt guarantees, and so on. And it also seems that states are normally transparent with taxpayer information. For example, obligations and liabilities. In contrast, functions such as the management of fiscal risks, audit, both internal and external, and scrutiny by supreme audit institutions emerge as the weakest areas of PFM. Now, given our current context of the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, this finding has several worrying implications. At the very least, the findings seem to suggest that many countries across the world may eventually struggle to properly execute billions of dollars being programmed or borrowed to manage the COVID-19 situation. And in fact, to expedite spending, countries may end up circumventing standard accountability procedures, which may clearly lead to increased risk of corruption. Finally, the report looks at PFM trends across time. And what the report shows is that countries are in general improving or strengthening their PFM systems over time, but there are several examples of regression. Looking ahead, it may be prudent for governments and the international development community to identify and prioritize reform for these aspects of the PFM system that are most at risk of slipping backwards. And so this is so that the system may be able to better withstand or to hold steady while managing the fiscal stresses of COVID-19. Let me stop here and hand over to my colleague Ushka, who will walk you through the remaining 3 sections of the report. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Richard. So in addition to the presentation of kind of global and regional PFM trends, this report also features a presentation of selected case studies. And why we've done this is to really kind of complement this high-level overview of PFM trends with a more in-depth analysis of PFM strengths and weaknesses at the country or territory level. And in this first edition of the report, we're presenting 4 case studies. We have Argentina. They recently had a first PEFA assessment, and this REACH PEFA assessment report highlights, for example, how incredibly comprehensive budget documentation is in Argentina and the strong role that the legislature plays in scrutinizing budget policy proposals. We're also featuring Ethiopia. They recently had a 4th PEFA assessment, but why we think they represent a really interesting case is that the PEFA assessment report not only presents PFM strengths and weaknesses, but also how they potentially influence service delivery in the country. Then we have Ukraine. Ukraine is the first country in the world that has had a successive PEFA assessment using the PEFA 2016 framework. But all in all, this has been the 4th PEFA assessment in Ukraine. So users can really see how incredibly how incredible Ukraine has progressed in terms of PFM reforms, specifically in areas of budget credibility, transparency of public finances, as well as external scrutiny and audit. And then we also have West Bank and Gaza. They've had a third PEFA assessment, and we believe they provide quite a compelling case of focusing on strengthening financial data integrity, as well as producing really comprehensive budget execution reports. Then we have another section that presents kind of global trends in integrating gender in the design, implementation, and evaluation of budget policies, and why we have done that. So this section 5, in future iterations, will always kind of focus on the links between PFM and broader development outcomes, including linking it with sustainable development goals. But for this year, we decided to explore links between PFM and SDG 5 on gender equality. We thought that would be quite a natural fit. As many of you might know, last year, PEFA launched a PEFA gender framework for assessing integration of gender in PFM. So we thought it would be important to kind of highlight findings of initial PEFA gender assessments. And what we were able to determine from a relatively small sample is that there's a growing, emerging trend in a very systematic integration of gender in PFM in countries around the world. But while countries' practices in doing so vary considerably, we notice that there are two kind of most common PFM tools that countries use to do so. They're producing gender budget statements, which is probably not a surprise. This is how equality budgeting started in Australia back in the 80s. But countries are also conducting ex post evaluations of budget policies to understand what the impacts of those policies have been on gender and on different segments of the society. But what we're hoping that users will be particularly excited about this chapter is that we're presenting numerous case studies of countries' experience in integrating gender in PFM by using a variety of different PFM tools, such as collection and analysis of sex disaggregated data, like in Korea and in Ukraine, producing gender reports, as well as getting the legislature highly involved in the process, like in Fiji. And then we have the last section of the report, which is a section that we call a call to action. As you will see when browsing through the report, this is the first time that we are making PEFA panel data set publicly available. So users can go access the report, download the PEFA panel data, and really start playing with the data, augment it with other data sets, and do some exciting research on different aspects of PFM, as well as links with other governance initiatives. You will see in the report, we're listing several ideas for further analysis that we find particularly important, but of course, users, PFM enthusiasts, PEFA users are encouraged to kind of think of other potential areas for analysis, and as well as to kind of reach out to the Secretariat and others to share the interesting findings. So with this, we really want to invite everyone to explore the report, browse through over 100 interactive visualizations, and really have fun when exploring global PFM trends. Thank you, and back to you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Pushka. At this point, let me take a minute or so to give you a live demonstration of the report. So our plan is to release the report at the end of this launch, a series of launches. So we have 4 launches planned, and the report will be made publicly available on the PEFA website for download and access. In the meantime, there are 4 key features I'd like to point out for interactive features about the report I'd like to emphasize. The first is that all charts are interactive. So the charts are all here in section 3. They're all interactive. Once they have these hover features. You can hover over them to see more details. In this particular chart, you can see that the data is broken down by subnational and national levels. The second feature is that all charts and data are shareable by social media and so on. And so here, they all have this three-pronged icon. Once you click, you can share the report on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and by email. The third feature is that the report is downloadable. You can download the report via PDF if you so desire. And finally, as Ushka mentioned, you can also download all data that that the report uses. Let me stop there and hand over back to our chair, who will take you forward with the rest of the session's proceedings. Thank you so much.
Ed, you're mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Oscar and Richard. Very much appreciated. The idea for this report came from all of you, the practitioners. We have seen the analysis of data regionally and in sectors, picking from the PEFA reports. The demand for such analysis inspired the PEFA Secretariat to put together this report. I thank all my colleagues on the PEFA Steering Committee for their support and inputs to this endeavor. Let me also take this opportunity to congratulate Oscar, Richard, and Zach, the core team who put together the report, and the entire PEFA Secretariat. I also thank Joachim Wena, Mark Miller, and Paulo De Rezio, and all the peer reviewers who contributed comments and feedback at various stages of the report's development. I'm sure you would agree that the look and feel of the digital report is really very brilliant. I appreciate the excellent work done by Scheme Design, and I now hand over the proceedings to Nika to moderate the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. I join you in thanking Ushka and Richard for the presentation, and of course, thanking everybody that has contributed to these reports. So just like Ed introduced me, my name is Adenike Oyeyola. I'm a practice manager in the Governance Global Practice, and I have the honor of being in charge of the PEFA Secretariat, who have been the one doing this very great work. So, and I'll be moderating this discussion this morning. The topic we're going to be discussing is public financial management in the 21st century, implications of the global report for PFM policy, practice, and research. Many of you would agree with me that the COVID-19 pandemic has destabilized the global economy, and it has shown how effective and strong governance is pertinent. There are concerns, many quarters, on how government would handle the challenges that the pandemic has brought about, not only in the short term, but also in the medium and in the long term. So it's a big honor to have a panel of very high-level PFM practitioners to be discussing this topic today. The panel will be focusing on 4 areas. The first, we're going to share different perspectives on what we know, on what the panel know about present and emerging PFM issues in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. Secondly, the panel will discuss areas of potential opportunities to strengthen PFM going ahead, so looking forward. Thirdly, the panel again will look at some specific examples of measures being taken in different countries and in order to explore such opportunities. And lastly, who would be answering questions about the PFM in the 21st century. So, I mean, I'll have the responsibility of directing the process of the panel. We have, let me see, just about 1 hour or less to go through this panel discussion. So we're going to try and keep it very smart in what we're saying. I'm going to break the discussion into two. The first is to hear from our panelists, the three people that has kindly agreed to join us and give their perspectives today. And the second part will be an open discussion. So please, there's a chat button, put in your questions, put in your comments, and we will try as much as possible to cover many of the chats during the discussion. So now let me go ahead and introduce our three panelists today. Like Ed said, these are practitioners, very strong practitioners in public financial management. So, and it's our honor to have them participate in this event. First, I'd like to introduce Sailendra Ratanayak. Sailendra is a Deputy Division Chief in the Fiscal Affairs Department of the IMF. Of course, is a well-known global expert on public financial management. Sailendra, thank you very much for joining us today. Secondly, I have Fred Yamba. Mr. Yamba is the Secretary to the Treasury at the Ministry of Finance in Zambia. He brings decades of experience in public financial management from a developing country perspective, which has successfully used the PEFA assessment to navigate PFM reforms. And last, but definitely not the least, I have Dr. Joachim Wehner. Joachim is an Associate Professor of Public Policy at the London School of Economics and Political Science. He's worked extensively on public finance in Canada, in Germany, in South Africa, and in the United Kingdom, and all with the aim of improving the use of public funds. So Sailendra, Fredson, Joachim, you are all welcome today, and thanks for joining us in this very interesting panel discussion. So I'll be asking each panelist two questions, one after the other, and right after that, we'll then open it up to the audience. So Sailendra, let me start with you. So my first question is a very fundamental one. And so the question is, what do you think PFM systems are delivering the needed flexibility to optimize development outcomes at sector level? So I want you to look at sector level and see how PFM systems are delivering the needed flexibility. Sailendra, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first of all, let me thank the World Bank Group for giving me this honor to come to this panel. So let me, this is an interesting question which you asked, but before I go into some of the details, let me discuss this issue by linking it to the main objectives of a strong PFM framework. As you know, there are four key goals of a strong PFM system: overall sustainability of public finances, efficient allocation of resources in line with government priorities, efficient public service delivery, and transparency and accountability in managing public funds. Therefore, to achieve optimal outcomes, whether it is in sector or otherwise, the PFM system should be able to effectively allocate to and execute priority development programs, at the same time ensuring overall fiscal sustainability and transparency. So just to give that context, now, as I was listening to the PEFA presentation results, countries have been strengthening their PFM systems over the years. But my experience shows that we still see gaps in several countries. From the perspective of the question you asked, I would highlight, for example, the lack of a comprehensive view of public finances, limitation in budget flexibility, because you mentioned budget flexibility, due to extensive budget rigidities we see in some countries, for example, earmarking of revenues, and lack of a medium-term focus in some countries also, to identify the fiscal space for priority spending in various sectors. This pandemic has actually further accentuated, I would say, the need for more flexible and agile budgets, as the ministries of finance are even further under strain to respond timely to this crisis. So let me mention 5 key areas or gaps that should be the focus of strengthening PFM systems to help optimize development outcomes at sector level. First, I think it's needless to overemphasize that first establish strong institutional coordination with clear roles of key PFM actors. The Minister of Finance, for example, needs to effectively coordinate the budget process, giving guidance to the line ministries or sector ministries, and scrutinizing sector priorities. Regardless of the type of budget process, whether it's top-down or bottom-up, clear political guidance and consensus is very important at the outset to set the overarching goals of public spending and sectoral priorities. This means a prominent role for the cabinet in conjunction with the Minister of Finance, and which also should provide otherwise the sector ministries may play games in terms of the information advantage they have to further their own interests. So that is the first thing I would like to highlight. Second, it's also very important to clarify the overall fiscal constraint with a medium-term perspective. Nearly all countries now face significant constraints on their public finances and more exposure to fiscal risks in the wake of the recent pandemic. Now, in close coordination with entities that are in charge of finding government's financing, for example, debt management or other institutions, there is a need to study the possible financing options to assess the overall fiscal constraint and set up the overall fiscal strategy and sector strategies. This is where I think the medium-term perspective is very useful to lock in future savings and reverse the impact of any temporary or one-off measures that have been taken and that needs to be wound down in future years. On sectors, I think it's also very important, third point I want to make, clearly identify the priority sectors. More limited resources and the need to ensure sustainable spending calls for a greater focus on strategic sectors. For example, health, social spending, water, support for economic recovery, etc., as identified, of course, by the authorities. In countries where these priority sectors are mostly dealt with by subnational governments, it's also important to give subnational governments a clear picture of the financing constraints and the macroeconomic scenarios that might impact their revenue. Fourth, ensure credible budget execution and predictability of funding. Our experience shows that good planning and budgeting is not enough unless we have a strong budget execution system to implement the budget as planned and approved. The gap between upstream and downstream of the budget cycle affects predictability of funding to various sectoral programs and projects. Fourth, it's going to be even more important in the course of the recovery from the pandemic, manage the investment projects portfolio very prudently in various sectors. For various reasons, as we know, countries keep more projects alive than are financially sustainable and try to stretch payments over a longer period. Such decisions reduce the net benefits of the investment portfolio. When cuts in investment spending are unavoidable, they should be based on transparent criteria and not across the board to minimize their negative impact. Cuts should target investment projects with lower benefits compared to costs, and the impact of the cuts on different groups or sectors of the economy should be consistent with established political priorities. So I think if countries take these 5 key steps, they should, I think, be able to leverage the PFM systems to optimize development outcomes at sector level. So I would stop there. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I mean, I really like the way you put the 5 core aspects forward, and I believe colleagues who are joining this important discussion are really taking these core aspects. Please, again, let me emphasize, start putting your questions in the chat and we'll come back to it. So, Salendra, you mentioned these very 5 core areas, and I totally agree with you. But as development partners, we would always encourage countries to build strong PFM foundations to support resilient recovery. But in addition to that, we will also encourage countries to prioritize their reform process. I mean, it's becoming a cliche, prioritization, which is very important given the funding issues and so many things that needs to be done. But my challenge is there does not seem to be a workable approach towards this prioritization. So how do you see this storyline emerging, given the crisis we have now, I mean, and the way going forward? So how do you see this storyline of prioritizing or whatever going forward? Over to you, Salendra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I think this is a very important point, and you are right. Reform prioritization has been emphasized for decades, but has proven challenging to apply in practice. I think it is important to recognize that one-size-fits-all type of PFM reform prioritization doesn't work. There are several examples we have heard of reform failures in several PFM areas, and these PFM reform failures have multiple causes, which should be analyzed and factored in for developing an appropriate prioritization strategy. Let me give some examples. Many a times people in charge of PFM reforms or technical assistance providers tend to focus on the technical aspects and not so much on the institutional and political economy aspects of reform. For example, while a flawed technical design of a treasury single account system or a financial management information system like IPMIS might have been addressed, there may be lack of ownership or opposition from powerful stakeholders to implement them. Similarly, while the design of the PFM legal framework may be adequate, but its enforcement might be weak. So, and also, I mean, add to that, it is also not uncommon to see a lengthy list of actions and over-ambitious timelines in the so-called prioritized reform action plans. The time periods for implementing PFM reforms are frequently underestimated. So what could we do for reform prioritization to work in practice then? The first step, I think, is to internalize the valuable lessons learned in PFM-related political economy and change management issues in particular. For reforms to succeed, both types of challenges, technical and institutional and political, need to be addressed. Again, let me also highlight maybe 5 important factors to keep in mind for ensuring reform success to build strong PFM foundations. First, recognize the usefulness, but also the limitations of PFM diagnostic tools. Diagnostic tools are very useful for making the overall evaluation of PFM strengths and weaknesses to identify the gaps, but they may not give sufficient information how reforms should be implemented. Which weak areas PFMs should be addressed first? For example, the sequencing question. What is the extent of institutional constraints, particularly on political economy side, and how these might be overcome? Second, try to customize or tailor the PFM system technical design, not to go with a one-size-fits-all, to align with stakeholders' roles and priorities in countries. This actually requires a bit of broad consultation with the relevant stakeholders. Third, try to build progressively political support for the reform measures. This is where I think focusing initially on low-hanging fruit or quick wins help to build support and push for harder decisions later, and mitigate resistance from strong and powerful actors. Fourth, sequence the reform measures taking account of the stakeholders' landscape. It's very important to understand the stakeholders' landscape in specific countries to strategically target the reform to the right stakeholders at the right time. Finally, this is more for the technical assistance providers, identify and support a key local counterpart to help steer the reform or to act as the reform champion and take credit for it. Now, coming to the pandemic world, the PFM reform prioritization is even more important in the post-COVID-19 world. Now, again, to give some examples, governments are using a range of support measures now to address the macroeconomic and social challenges posed by the current COVID-19 pandemic. Support measures are taking various types, and some of them are resulting in higher fiscal deficits. Some of them may not be impacting deficits in this year, but they will affect the public finances over the medium term going forward, particularly the off-budget or below-the-line operations. So this highlights that the lot of fiscal risks governments are undertaking, and strong PFM systems are needed to guard against these fiscal risks and enhance the government's capacity to respond to the crisis and manage these fiscal risks. As the lockdown ends, the governments are also going to begin to focus on the recovery side as well. And the public investments are going to play an important role in the recovery. But institutional arrangements for taking decisions on the selection and management of investment projects would be key in this area. And this would include all key stakeholders in central government, SNGs, and public corporations, where these sectors make substantial contributions to public investment. Overall, just to summarize, the post-pandemic world has brought to the fore the importance of prioritizing PFM foundations in some emerging areas, I would say managing fiscal risks and public investments, while the need for strengthening core PFM areas still continues. So I would stop there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sailendra. I know this is a very passionate topic for you, and I know you can go on and on, but I mean, I really take your point. Diagnostics are very important, and what we always emphasize is the need for political will and the country buy-in. I mean, once we have a country buy-in, then they can be able to translate it into reforms and sequence the reforms. So now let's look at the country experience, core country experience. So I'd like to go to Mr. Yamba, and if you don't mind, I'll call you Fredson. I hope that's okay with you. So Mr. Yamba, you saw the presentation by the PEFA colleagues, and one of the things that came out is the fact that budget looks great, but execution is a challenge. In the same way, there are several reforms that looks good on paper to start, but may not have tangible results in the countries. So looking ahead, how do you think we can fix this core situation? Yeah, Fredson?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Well, with regard to that, as you are aware, the PFM reforms are aimed at improving, first of all, accountability and transparency in the use of public resources. And the reforms, in most cases, are dynamic. Now, if you look at the last 20 years, many developing countries embarked on PFM reforms that were part of the IMF Structure Adjustment Program, that's the SAPS. The scope of these reforms was quite comprehensive, standard, and covered all areas of the PFM cycle. Beyond the structure adjustment programs, many countries have continued to implement the PFM reforms to address areas of weaknesses in the budget cycle. In terms of design, the scope of the reforms are usually solid as there are clear development objectives, output indicators, and output outcomes, including the reform activities required to achieve the set objectives. However, the outcomes of these reforms have been quite mixed, I should mention. And in case of Zambia, the government has been implementing PFM reforms for more than 20 years and has made progress in the areas of the PFM legal reforms, planning and budgeting processes, public procurement, financial accounting and reporting, internal audit, external audit, and parliamentary oversight. However, I must mention a lot more needs to be done, such as expanding the IPMIS and Treasury single account coverage to the districts, as well as that of electronic government procurement system, and also enhancing data management system and continuous training of staff, just to mention some. The challenges that we're faced in implementing these reforms include, but not limited to the following: 1, lack of staff capacity involved in implementing reform projects and transfer of skills. Secondly, resistance to change and staff turnover. Thirdly, procurement delays. 4, lack of resources to implement the reforms. And 5th, poor contract management, which has resulted in delayed execution of projects. To address these challenges and ensure that the reforms are achieving the desired outcomes, there is need to ensure that the staff involved in project implementation have the capacity to execute the functions. Further, procurement processes need to be rationalized to ensure efficiency. In addition, there's also need to ensure that capacity is built for staff involved in contract management. The government has also put in place the PFM laws, such as the Public Finance Management Act of 2008 and also the Public Procurement Act of 2020, with specific provisions for offenses and penalties against staff failing to discharge their functions, which consequently result in wastage of resources. I should mention that the government has also consistently undertaken public expenditure and financial accountability assessments to determine the level of progress made in the implementation of the PFM reforms, as well as identified areas of weaknesses in the budget cycle that require reform interventions. We will continue to use PEFA and various diagnostic assessments to inform our PFM reforms, and we remain on track to accelerate the positive impacts of the reforms. This will ensure that the reform areas are identified in a structured manner, and hence the reforms are country-specific and country-driven. The government also considers that the next step in this evolution process is strengthening of PFM at sectoral level and linking PFM improvements with service delivery results in core areas such as health, education, and local government services. The government has also already started taking steps to strengthen PFM of local governments, and currently we are working together with the World Bank to strengthen the PFM and accountability in the health sector, which is quite timely in view of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, benchmarking performance against similar countries, as well as sharing PFM reforms experiences, is something to be considered. For the government of Zambia, we've done study tours that have been undertaken to other countries such as Ghana and Mauritius, and we've been able to share lessons and experiences. With regards, as the global report now is being launched today by the PEFA Secretariat, I think this is a major step that will be useful in many countries. While country context is very important for PFM reforms, the trend on the progress of a global and regional level will give us a broad direction of where we need to aspire to be. So going forward, I would also encourage the PEFA team to further unpack the reasons behind the successes and limitations in progress at global and regional level. From Zambia, we are glad to support the global initiative of PEFA, Secretariat, and development partners by sharing our views and experience. That will be my submission. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to really know what's going on in Zambia. This is really good. So substantial investments would have been made with respect to everything we have said, all in an attempt to strengthen these PFM information systems. So my question would be, from your perspective, is the government of Zambia getting value for money for these investments? And I wanted to expand the term government to also include the citizens. Are they getting value for money? You can, speak from the perspective of Zambia, which you are leading, but probably from the perspective of other countries. And closely related to that, how do you think the role of PFM technology, such as e-means, e-procurement, cloud-based systems will emerge in the post-COVID-19 world?
Thank you. Thank you very much. What I should mention is that indeed, across the world, governments have made substantial investments in the PFM information systems in order to enhance accountability and transparency in the use of public resources. Here again, I must mention that the picture is mixed on whether governments are getting value for money for their investments in the PFM information systems. Now, to zero down in case of Zambia, in the last 20 years, government has invested in excess of $100 million US dollars on the PFM reforms. We are beginning to realize slowly that the value of this investment we are beginning to realize the value of this investment over the last couple of years. And what we've noticed is that in the last 5 years, revenue collection has greatly improved because of the PFM reforms that we've undertaken. I can mention that domestic revenue has increased on average year to year at a rate of 17% from 2015 to 2018, and in fact has exceeded the targets. Another positive result is the reduction in financial management. If you look at the Auditor General's report in Zambia, this indicated reduction of 79%. That is up from $43.5 million US dollars in 2015 to $18.5 million US dollars in 2017 in the value of financial mismanagement. Now, this is a big reduction. This is also at the time the audit coverage for the Office of Auditor General is now at almost 100%. I must mention that the Office of the Auditor General structures and staffing have been expanded and has now a presence in all the 10 provinces of Zambia. Further, the office has now a mandate to audit all 116 local governments. Now, during the year 2020, the office was able to audit the financial management of all the 116 local government authorities for the financial year ended 31st December 2018 and 2019. Now, with regard to the role of how the public financial management technology will emerge post the COVID-19 world, the future looks bright. In the case of Zambia, the government has embarked on an ambitious IT transformation agenda, which was launched by the president in 2019. And the objective of this reform is to digitize more than 200 public services, including revenue collections from payments for government services. In total, the plan is to digitize more than 216 public services through the implementation of the government service bus and payment gateway. This will enhance accountability and transparency, efficiency, and security by utilizing IT solutions such as mobile payments and electronic payments. The advantages of the IT solutions is less human contact, thus reducing the potential for corruption and also transmission of the COVID-19 pandemic. Further, the misappropriation of revenue is equally eliminated. To date, the government of Zambia has implemented 52 electronic services on the government service bus, and these are accessible on the Zamport to the members of the public seeking various services from the government. The government service bus is also interfaced with the IFMIS to ensure seamless interchange of data between all government systems connected to the bus. Going forward, it is government's intention to build an end-to-end digital ecosystem for the whole government. The government has also implemented the Treasury Single Account, which has improved cash management and efficiency in the processing of payments. The TSA, I must mention, has ensured effective aggregate control of government cash resources, because the consolidation of cash resources through the TSA is actually meant to optimize government cash management to avoid short-term borrowing and associated costs to finance the expenditure of some government agencies. while other agencies keep idle cash balances in their bank accounts. With regard to the risk in the major IT projects on the PFM, is the broad scope of such projects. They are most successful when we align functionality of the IT system with the problem definition. I think the first steps are the most important one as they set out the direction. This implies that all teams involved from government and beyond should be focused on the problem statement as viewed from the government. In Zambia, at various points of time, we periodically revise and refocus on the short and medium-term issues that government is likely to face and leverage on technology solutions like IFMIS, government service bus, etc. With regard to the PEFA assessment, this has helped us to ensure we are aligned with the global-based practices to national requirements. And that's my submission on that issue.
Thank you very much. And I know we can go on and on listening to the very good work that is going on in Zambia. Thank you very much. That was very helpful. So I see we're having a very active chat, quite a lot of activities. Please, thanks very much for that. Let it keep coming. Let it keep coming. We'll come to your questions very soon. So I'd like to turn it to the academics. Let's look at this from the perspective of the academic work. And Joachim is here to help me in that regard. So Joachim, relocating budgets to health sectors and launching ambitious stimulus plans are some of the fiscal measures being undertaken to counter the COVID-19 pandemic health crisis. But these drastic actions can pose significant transparency challenges. I mean, as you and I know, issues on accountability, issues on transparency. So how can increased budgetary disclosure and participation improve governance and development outcomes during and after the COVID-19 pandemic? So Joachim, over to you.
Thank you very much for your questions. And also let me just say thank you for inviting me to be part of this event together with two practitioners who have such impressive experience. And I really support the idea behind this report. I think it's a really good initiative that we harness the data to try to understand better how to and try to understand how to improve public financial management. So thank you for that, and I'm very supportive of that. To your question, my fear is that this pandemic will expose some long-standing weaknesses that your reports and your findings have captured in oversight and accountability institutions. And that would partly inform my comments in terms of where I would see the key areas that we might want to focus on in order to change that and to make sure that that money spent actually does something on the ground. So I think spending without accountability and oversight, spending without a modicum, some basic level of checks and balances will be bad expenditure. And unfortunately, in an emergency situation, you have a lot of very quickly where very often checks and balances are suspended. And that is really visible throughout the budget cycle. It starts with very weak legislative control at the start of the budget process during budget approval in the legislature. So in many countries, and here I include the United Kingdom, which is not doing well in this regard, I believe the level at which Parliament oversees public finances is very, very high. So spending gets approved very often at a departmental level, and parliaments don't pay or don't have enough control over what goes on inside departmental budgets. And I take very well the point that Salendra made early on about the need for flexibility. I agree very much with that, but there's some kind of balance that needs to be struck between flexibility on the one hand, giving the space to be nimble, but at the same time having a sensible level. Many countries including my country, the level of oversight is extremely aggregate, and that comes to the fore in a crisis like this, where you have a lot of reallocations and transfers between different items in the budget that get made. And that speaks to my second point I would make here, that a second weakness then is during the execution stage of the budget process, where for many years now, we do know that legislatures in particular do not pay enough attention to that. Legislatures kind of have their prime moment. Budget day, and the finance minister comes, the chancellor comes to the parliament, and there's a lot of media attention. And then the spotlight disappears, and the nitty-gritty, the daily grind of having a look at actual expenditure during the financial year, that is one of the weak areas in oversight in really almost all countries. And I think this is especially crucial, of course, in the context of a pandemic, where you have so much emergency expenditure, where things change so quickly. You really need strong in-year oversight institutions, which I feel into this crisis were very underdeveloped in many places. So in addition to that, the oversight of tools such as contingency reserves and so on deserve real attention in crisis situations. And these are sensible tools to have. And they allow quick responses by governments, but they need to be also underpinned by real-time reporting, in particular to legislatures. So I think the approval and budget oversight during execution, there's a key question mark here over how can we make legislatures play a stronger role in the process. And that is partly about rethinking the institutions that enable that. But one of the key obstacles often is, why are these institutions weak in the first place? And that very often has to do with MPs, parliamentarians, not having an oversight role in the first place. So one thing to say these institutions should change in that way or that way, but why isn't that happening by itself? It very often has to do with insufficient incentives of parliamentarians. And then your report also highlighted that a key weakness has been on the audit side. So there has been a lot of hard work going into strengthening supreme audit institutions. And I think in many ways, they will be the ones picking up after all the spending has taken place, they will be picking up the pieces and investigating what went wrong. And many of them have responded in very creative ways. They're issuing special reports. For example, the Auditor General in South Africa is issuing special reports on COVID-related expenditure here in the UK. That's the case in many other countries. Auditors are they're trying to do a lot to keep an eye on spending that is taking place in the context of the pandemic. But if you, I was glad to hear there has been investment, for example, in Zambia in strengthening the staffing and the capacity of the Auditor General. But we know from the PEFA reports that this remains a core weakness. So I think oversight and accountability institutions, both the legislature and and strengthening. Let me maybe mention one last point, that perhaps this crisis is crystallizing that a lot of spending measures have been undertaken on an emergency basis in this crisis, and that means weaker control and weaker oversight. And maybe that will need some special attention because it is taking place on a scale that is very, very large. Emergencies like a little flood or an earthquake, of course, they can be very large emergencies as well. But what we're seeing at the moment is in many countries out of all proportions. And that really should prompt us to rethink the transparency of our emergency expenditure and procurement provisions. So this I see as a separate area where I would say we need to maybe pay attention and learn the lessons from what's going on what's going wrong at the moment with some of the spending, and how can we strengthen these institutions so that the spending is better used and put to better use in the future.
Thanks very much, Joachim. That's really, really helpful. I mean, transparency and accountability has always been core issues that I believe we need to take a closer look at. So in another 2 minutes, I want to turn to the public, but I wanted to quickly give me some points. 2 core things we're doing at the PEFA Secretariat now. One is on research. We're coming up with various topics and doing some good research on it, also for the benefit of the PFM in the larger scale. You also notice that the global report featured gender this time. The intention is to feature different aspects in the annual report. So from your perspectives, what are the critical PFM areas where future research is needed and where the global reports could contribute in the future? In 1 or 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. Let me be quick. So I think PEFA has done well in recent years to start to focus on subnational governments, and that partly acknowledges that even inside countries, we have a lot of variation. And I think one step further along this path, broadly speaking, would be to think more about spending sectors and big spending ministries. So how can we use the PEFA framework to think about what goes on in particularly important sectors, because some of the underlying problems, even within the same country and the same governments that drive the quality of public spending, are very, very different. So how can we harness this tool to think about this in a more sector-specific way? That would be one challenge I would throw maybe to you. And then let me just make one very quick comment. One thing that very often strikes me is that we talk a lot about institutions, and understand why this is the case, but I think we also need to pay attention to the people that run these institutions. And I'm often struck by a lot of the challenges that are faced in public sectors around the world in terms of understaffing, in terms of key staff not having the requisite qualifications, etc. So this kind of, how do we think about performance in government by maybe bringing in also the people and understanding who runs these institutions, not solely focusing on the institutions and procedures per se. So that's a second point I would make.
Thanks so much. I mean, everybody will agree with me. This has been a very good conversation. Don't go away, panelists. There are questions coming to you, because I'm seeing some very good and very interesting questions on the chat. I will take some of it. I know my colleague Tia has been helping me to put together the questions, and I'll call on her very soon. I noticed that some of these questions are already answered, either from the panel discussion or some of my colleagues have been answering as well. But Tia, any hot thing from your side? Could you give me some questions that we can take for now?
Absolutely. Thank you, Nike, and thank you everybody for your questions and comments. Very, very helpful and useful. I just wanted to clarify first, the one question's been coming to us in terms of getting access to the report. Just to say that report will be launched officially a bit later, but we will post you a link to the report that you can have a look at in the chat later, just to clarify that first. And then there's a second, or the first set of questions rather, that are due with the report itself or PEFA framework. And that one set of questions is about comparison between countries, as we know is always difficult to do. And the questions concern whether the global report places caveats on comparisons between countries. And the second related question is that all countries mentioned as best practice countries are rife with corruption and financial indiscipline. how can PFM in these countries be cited as model systems? And that is a sort of maybe for PEFA colleagues to clarify. But the second set of questions is more for the panelists, and that is to do with prioritization, as the panelists have already been discussing. There are questions that coming through the chat about what are the key aspects in your perspective in the PFM system that we should really try to prioritize, particularly in the context of the current crisis? How should PFM experts and countries trying to put COVID crisis in the context and differentiate and prioritize different elements? And is it too early to say whether progress on PFM has deteriorated during the current crisis? Do we know yet for sure what has happened and what hasn't happened? I will leave it there. There are much further questions on sector-specific on climate change issues, but maybe I'll leave it there and Nike and come back to the third set of questions later.
Thanks very much, Tia. Let me just, before I go to answering the question, Salendra, get ready. I'm going to throw that at you, and probably Joachim to also support. I see comments on interest in linking with the PEFA Secretariat from the Southern African, I think, PFM body. So please get in touch with PEFA Secretariat. It's pefa.org. Get in touch with them and they'll be happy to support you. Salendra, so what's your perspective? What is the PFM to prioritize? I know you mentioned that in your first point, you talked about the 5 core ways or areas, but if you can just mention 1, 2 in 1 minute. Over to you, Salendra.
Thank you. I think on prioritization in the post-pandemic, one of the area to focus on would be to take stock of the fiscal risks which countries have already undertaken, because many of the fiscal support measures that have been taken by the governments are not necessarily reflected in the budget. Some of them have been off budget, some of them have been in the form of guarantees or other types of below the line support, as we call them. And their impact would come in future budgets. So it's important to assess the implications of those measures and be prepared how to address them. I mean, some of them might have to be borne by the governments if the risks are high, or some of the state-owned enterprises who have received guarantees if those guarantees are called, for example. This is very important. So I have stopped there. Maybe that's one key area to go forward.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. I see a question on the chat. It says, what is the link between PFM and service delivery? To me, it looks like the person asking the question has answered, but I would like to call on the head of PEFA Secretariat, Srini, who was actually, who wears a double hat, very experienced in PFM and service delivery, to probably in 1 minute to Srini, talk about PFM and service delivery. Srini.
Thank you very much, Nike. Thank you very much, Nike, and great to see all the chats coming up quickly on the service delivery issues. So there is this clear disconnect one sees globally on the PFM systems created at central level, typically led by ministries of finance, and the demands from the sector, particularly from health, education. How does the PFM system work as an enabler for more efficient service delivery, which is one of the key budgetary outcomes, or is it a bottleneck? So there is a lot of effort going on across the world amongst partners on figuring out what are the issues which are becoming bottlenecks for getting the right kind of a flexibility and timing for the funds, and also the accountability relating to that. One quick thought I can actually also leave is that recently the World Bank team released a new tool called FinHealth. So this is a kind of a bottom-up bottleneck approach to overcoming PFM problems from a health sector perspective. And that's actually a trend which is spreading across various development partners who are trying to look at it from that perspective. Within the PEFA Secretariat, we are taking these experiences and trying to position going forward the PEFA tool as a stronger enabler towards service delivery in sectors. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks very much, Srini. Thanks very much. I have another question, and Tia, I'll come to you. I mean, if you have questions, just let me know. It says climate change has become a bigger issue vis-a-vis fiscal sustainability. Are you considering such changes to PEFA framework in line with the SDG or gender-related budget? This is interesting to me because I know we're working on climate change PFM in the PEFA Secretariat. So Srini or someone in the PEFA Secretariat, again, in very briefly, do you want to speak to that?
Thanks, Nikkei. So quickly on the climate change related issue, eventually any dimension of PFM event has to be within the overall country's national PFM system. So recognizing this, so within the PEFA Secretariat, we created this supplementary tool on having a kind of a climate responsiveness in public financial management systems and understand how well they are aligned within the overall structure. So this tool is now being piloted across several countries, and we hope that these experiences of pilot will enable us to finalize the tool and release. It's also put as a part of the finance minister's platform of various countries on having climate responsiveness into the overall budget process. This is work in progress and one of the most interesting areas that is emerging, and we look forward to collaborating with anyone interested in this discipline. Over.
Thank you very much, Srini. So I would like to point these questions to Richard and or Oshka. So it says, does the report provide evidence that progress on PFM reform has deteriorated during COVID-19, or is it too early to say? So anyone wants to take that?
Thank you very much, Nike. The very short answer to the question is no, not at this point. We do intend, though, to look at it once we are looking at future iterations of the report. It's important to recognize, though, that COVID-19 not only impacted PFM in general, but also PEFA and the data that we have access to. So the analysis will be a little tricky, but we will do our very best to look at the extent to which disasters such as COVID-19 have impacted the PFM systems globally, and we'll potentially look at this in future iterations of the report. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. So there's a question from Agnes, and I'm going to respond to that myself. She says, we have indeed achieved progress in terms of assessing gender responsiveness of PFM system. I'd like to know if there are plans to link the PEFA indicators to other social development outcomes, sustainable development goals such as health and education. Linking PFM to service delivery would help maximize the use of PEFA for better policy making. So just a very brief response to that. There's a lot of work we're doing currently, trying and doing in the PEFA Secretariat. Focus on service delivery is one aspect that is of interest to us. But what I'm going to suggest to Agnes, to every other person online, is that if you have suggestions, we have a place on the PEFA website where you can put your suggestions. So we're doing research, updating global reports annually. So you can come up with suggestions on areas that you think should be focused on. So thanks for that, a very important question. We would usually say that PFM is not just for PFM, it's for the purpose of being able to implement some things, which includes in service delivery. So Tia, any question on your side?
Thank you, Nike. We've also have a couple of questions around the broader context for PFM reforms. For example, our final panelist comments on looking beyond institution to focusing on individuals, their capacity, focusing on what's possible, and looking for champions is critical. Is there any thinking to focus on tackling this important angle of reform and the broader civil service reform agenda to facilitate many key PFM reforms?
Okay, who would like to take that of our three guests? Joachim, do you want to take a stab at that? Otherwise, anyone in the PEFA Secretariat can help.
I can just offer a few observations in response to that. So I think on the one hand, institutions are strengthened by people who choose to strengthen them. And, you know, that depends a lot on who is the leader of a government, for example, and does that person have an interest in making stronger institutions? So that is such a big political issue. But the one area where I've very directly encountered this for a number of years was trying to strengthen legislatures in terms of their budgetary role. I often go in front of parliamentary committees, and periodically they have inquiries into how can we strengthen the budget process in the parliament. And it kind of feels to me I'm bringing the same presentation every time. And that tells me something about kind of the underlying incentives for change, and that they're sadly often lacking. So I don't have a brilliant answer to this, but other than just be opportunistic when you see that hunger for change and someone is really asking that question, go for it. Then throw everything at supporting that initiative. But trying to stimulate something where there is no demand is a very futile kind of enterprise.
That's very good enough. Thanks very much. But I have this last question for you, colleagues. We have just 6 minutes remaining. Very great questions, and I'm very glad we have so much interest in this regard. There are 3 other launches that is going to take place, and we'll have opportunity to ask more questions. But this is for you, Joachim. So the question says, under the state of emergency situations where legislative power is suspended, what is the best way to ensure accountability in the use of public funds? And you may link it to what you said when you were discussing about, you know, focusing on individuals' capacity, and probably even the citizens. I mean, so would you want to take a stab at that?
Oh, that's such a tricky one. Maybe some of the other colleagues can comment on that, but I'm just aware that even in the OECD, you know, some governments have had months or many weeks in states of emergency, and these are very often situations where spending is authorized on a very different basis than along the normal process. So I think we need some kind of radical transparency that would underpin that. On the one hand, there's clearly a need to be quick and not to be encumbered by rules that slow you down in a crisis response. But for example, if you award a contract outside normal procurement procedures that is very large, maybe the Public Accounts Committee should know immediately, or maybe, you know, there should be very strict publication requirements, which in many instances, even in my own country, have not always been adhered to in the past few months here. So sorry, no grand answer, but my hunch is that the key there is in transparency. The response, transparency.
Thank you very much, and that's very helpful. Colleagues, unfortunately, that's all I can take on the chat. Great questions, great suggestions as well. I see suggestions from Anjum on debts and debt sustainability and how PEFA can help to strengthen the asset management. Well taken. I also see a very good comment from Gregory on assessing the impact of the political cycle on the progress or regression of PFM reforms. Well taken. Other very good comments, but of course, because of time, I may not be able to take them again. But I think it's just a good time to start saying my thank you. But my core takeaway, I can't summarize all the good things we've said at this discussion today, but I think just a few things that still sticks with me. One is that there's need for budget credibility. PFM reforms are pertinent. Diagnostics are important, but I mean, there's need to translate them to prioritized and actionable reform processes. In order to have a very good reform and to tackle the challenges with this COVID-19 pandemic and other pandemic or other situations that we may encounter, there is need for a strong political will, there is need for government buy-in. It's also necessary to align IT systems with the problem definition. I got that very strongly from Zambia, and I'm holding on to that. So it's not just IT for the sake of IT. We need to align it with the problem definition. And when it comes to transparency and accountability, the government just have to go full length. Joachim, that's coming from you, and it has to be at all levels, at the national, at the subnational, and at the departmental level. Surendra, thanks for the five ways that you gave us. I think it's been very helpful for everybody here today. So I think it's a very good time to say a very big thank you to three people who I now consider as friends, to Sailendra, to Fredson, and to Joachim. Great discussion. Thank you so much. We hope we can always count on you to get more perspectives on PFM as we continue to work on this global report. And to everybody that has contributed on the chat and for all participants, thanks so much for this. We hope you've been able to get some things. Please make sure you go on PEFA website and make your contributions. You can be very sure that we're going to work with whatever we get there. I would like to especially thank my special colleagues from the PEFA Secretariat who have put this great work together. I mean, just recognizing the fact that we have a lot of data and we can use it for this very important global report. So thanks to all the colleagues in the PEFA Secretariat, and well done, kudos to you all. Again, to the colleagues who are helping us behind for the technical work, for the video, the review, thank you very much for this. Just to mention that this conversation continues. We have 3 more launches that is taking place. We have French event tomorrow. We have Spanish on 23rd, and another one in English that is dedicated to the Asian and African countries, taking the time into consideration. So please help us advertise this and be a part of the great progress that we hope we can join you in making in the aspects of public financial management. So thanks again for this. It's exactly 11 a.m. and I would like to call it a day. So again, thanks everybody, and do have a great day ahead.
Thank you, Nikki, Srini, and everyone. This was very helpful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.